name's John Gilbert. I'm the owner of Options Consulting Group, if you didn't know that already. And thank you for joining today's webinar. Today, we're going to be addressing the key findings from our recent business sentiment survey and presenting insights to address the priorities and the issues that are facing business and business leaders in today's challenging business environment. I'm joined by my two senior colleagues, Justin Newman and Andrew Jones, who will take you through the main issues highlighted in the survey responses and those issues that are on the minds of business leaders. Before we get started, just a couple of points around housekeeping. The presentation will go for a maximum of 45 minutes, so hopefully you can stay the course. Please post any questions that you have on the way through into the chat room. They will be answered by either Justin or Andrew at the end of the presentation. And all of the information that is presented today is available from our website and/or on request. So without any further ado, let's get started, Justin, and over to you.
Thank you, John, and thank you everyone for joining us today and for taking your time to fill out the business sentiment survey that we'll be covering. Just very briefly, by way of an introduction, I commenced my career 25 odd years ago doing pure industrial relations in the Fair Work Commission and the like, and over time shifted more into generalist HR because I found I had a real interest and a real passion in working with both business leaders as well as employees on focusing on how can we make business better for everybody. Andrew, do you like to introduce yourself to everyone?
Sure. Hey, it's great to be with you all this morning. And my name's Andrew. I've been working in the corporate environment for about 23 years, doing leadership development consulting. I spent a lot of my time working with organisations on thinking about practical leadership development. How do you shape an organisational culture that's conducive to workers thriving? And more recently been doing a lot of work in the area of cultural intelligence and working with very diverse working environments. And I also do a lot of one-on-one coaching. That's me.
Thank you, Andrew. By way of, I guess, giving a clear illustration of the nature that we do and what we're focusing on today, this Venn diagram is a great way to, if you will, separate the people and business performance into the two key elements. One being the HR structure, which tends to be the area I focus on. The other being organisational culture, which again is more Andrew's specialty. But as you can see, both of these, there's a level of overlap and both are critical for success. If you look to the left, you'll see compliance at the top. I think compliance is one of those things that people immediately think, oh, this is going to be difficult, boring and painful. Yet it actually need not be. I find a lot of the work that I do with clients is very much taking compliance obligations and saying, how can we actually make compliance something that actually gives people a level of certainty and confidence and actually reflects the business culture or the way the business would want to run? The other critical points about the HR role of managers, business continuity and support to managers are all very much saying, how can we ensure business continuity by making sure that managers and supervisors understand their role and ensuring that there are processes and systems in place that actually run the way you would like to run the business as opposed to getting in the way. Andrew, did you want to talk us through organisational culture?
Sure. I think most organisations these days have a vision and mission statement with a set of values that go with that. And one of the key roles of leadership is ensuring that who we say we are organisationally is what we're actually doing, both in terms of internal organisational culture, but also in terms of client interface. As you would know, most of you, many leaders get promoted into leadership because they're very good at their technical roles.
Webinar.
But then they need to be developed. They need to be given additional skills to help them become effective at leadership. And when we see that phrase intentional culture really is moving beyond the default settings that you always end up with culture when you put a group of people together. And it's really a leadership activity to think about what kind of culture do we want? What are the things we're doing to actually drive that culture? And we know that when you get your culture right, it has a whole range of impacts, both internally and externally. And of course, we can't forget that a big part of getting your culture right is about staff professional development, whether it's their technical skills, their behavioral kind of elements and behaving according to organizational values, and the way that they interface with each other and with clients as well.
Andrew, you use the term culture, and perhaps, and we're both probably going to use it a lot, but it's one of those words that I think gets overused at times. So when you say culture, what comes to mind for you?
Well, that's an interesting question for me. I do a lot of work with more broadly beyond organizational culture, but culture really is just the way we do things around here. And very often, I think in organizations, you'll find leadership teams scratching their heads and saying, how do we end up with this particular set of norms? And so when I talk about intentional culture, I guess it begins with an assessment of what are our norms? Are we happy with the way that we work together and interact together? Are we happy with our reputation in the marketplace? And what are the things we can do to shift those norms to make them more healthy and to make sure that our staff actually are thriving and enjoying the work that they do? We know that when organizational culture becomes sometimes a bit toxic or unhealthy, people start to look for the door. We also know that when you get your culture right, it's incredibly attractive as you look for new staff and as you try to bring on talent into your business. People are looking for that environment that they can really thrive in and where the norms that they experience day to day are supportive and healthy.
Yeah, it's interesting you say about people heading for the door. I think at times certainly good people do that if the culture's not right. From time to time, I help out clients who have challenges where they have individuals who actually don't fit their culture and either for whatever reason aren't heading for the door or have tried to head for the door but been unable to do so on account of how they've conducted themselves.
Yeah.
What we might do now, though, and I guess one of the key reasons for everyone joining us today is actually have a look at the business sentiment key findings. There were two key parts to it. The first was looking at employment challenges. The other part, of course, was looking at the business key priorities. As you can see for results, retention of key personnel, developing leadership and management are the two critical parts of employment challenges that respondents are facing. And the business key priorities, well ahead of everything else, was improving operational efficiency, as well as expanding it into new markets. And then thirdly, interesting, that enhancing employee engagement. What's really interesting to me about these results is that really strong link between improving operational efficiency and the ability to do so by keeping your best people, but also actually developing leaders and managers so they can improve performance, because that again becomes critical when expanding into those new markets, as many respondents have expressed interest in. Is there anything that stands out to you, Andrew?
Yeah, I know. As we look at the business key priorities, I think some of those elements are technical elements, aren't they? Like knowing how to expand into a new market or bringing new digital technology into your workplace to improve efficiencies. But then you can also see the elements there that are about people, and knowing that when your employees are working well, when they're properly engaged and actually enthusiastic about the work they do, that actually ends up impacting things like operational efficiency and cost reduction, because your people are interested and have a sense of ownership and enthusiasm about making sure that the business works well.
Absolutely. I think you're right. I think digital transformation is a really interesting one. I think at the moment, a lot of people are having a look at it and saying, well, it's not a key priority because we still want to better understand new technologies such as AI or what is the benefits that they might actually bring to our business.
Mm.
So if we look at the employment challenges in a bit more detail, certainly looking at engagement, development and opportunity in the retention space, again, engagement is one of those terms that gets thrown around a lot within HR circles, but is very much focused on how do you make sure that your employees and your team feel valued and a part of your business, and then what development and what opportunities do they see? Retention often comes down to two key things. One is trust and confidence, that employees feel truly valued and people take the time to get to know them and treat them as individuals. But another key part of retention is that belief that they're working somewhere positive and they actually see a future for themselves. The other side of it, of course, and we'll come to leadership and development shortly, is a recruitment. Recruitment is very much at times, it's science, it's art, it's gut feel, it's asking questions and all of those things. But often for both the candidate and for the recruiting manager, it comes down to rapport in that relationship. Is this someone I feel I could spend my day with and something I could get the most out of? A critical part of that, of course, is alignment. So is there a level of consistency in outlook? Are we both or all working to the same objectives? And that employee value proposition is an area we do a lot of work on, because that's saying, what is it that we offer as a business to prospective employees? And even more importantly, how can we effectively communicate that? It's interesting, a number of times I work with business leaders about what their business offers. And there's all this fantastic stuff from a development perspective, but they're not overt about promoting it to potential new employees or even to employees within the existing business. Andrew, what are your thoughts on leadership and development when it comes to the employment challenges our respondents have put forward?
Well, the first bullet point there talks about culture, and you were talking about alignment a moment ago, and I think we often talk about alignment in terms of cultural fit, and so getting the right people on the bus, the people who are passionate about what the organisation does, who understand it, and who are enthused by it. You'll notice in the second bullet point there, it talks about leaders driving engagement, and I think there's an art to that. There's a very intentional skill set that's about building relationship, engaging your people, and helping them move beyond just being employees who do their hours to being employees who are actually genuinely caught up in the vision and mission of the organisation and excited about seeing that vision and mission being realised. The bottom bullet point there, Justin, talks about delegation, and I'm often bemused in my work as I interact with many different organisations, private, public, not-for-profit, at just how badly organisations do this. Delegation is essentially, it's your position description. Your position description is that standing delegation that really lets you know this is what you own in our business. This is what you'll be held accountable to. And when you get delegation right, it's incredibly engaging. And I put there, it's the gateway to transformation of the individual and of the organisation. And I think there's a huge opportunity here for leaders to really understand what does excellent delegation look like, and how do we actually give a sense of ownership and build enthusiasm in our staff through that delegation that then drives that engagement that we're talking about. And back up to the very top bullet point just for a moment, we're talking about well-being and motivation. They're huge themes in our workplace these days. And, I don't think well-being, motivation and culture happen by accident. And we've already talked in a previous slide about intentional culture. And I think leaders have to be thinking about how do we promote that sense of well-being in our people? Are we motivating them in the ways that they're individually being able to use their individual gifts? Which brings you back a little bit to recruitment, making sure that you haven't got round pegs in square holes, but that people are doing things that they're naturally enthused about and really good at.
There's a really interesting exercise you can do around delegation I've done with business leaders, where you have them think about and note down how do they actually spending their day and what takes up their time. And when they've done that, they then go through and reflect and say, how much of this work could I or should I actually delegate to somebody else?
Yeah.
And when that's done well, and I'll be honest, it can be a bit hard to be honest with yourselves at times over these things, often leaders find they can actually free up a lot of time through effective delegation, but that does involve placing a level of trust in their good people, which often they like to do. They just fall into that trap of, it's probably just quicker if I do it myself, or my team are busy doing other things, which at times can have the opposite effect, and your team can take it as it feels that they are not trusted and not being given those opportunities to put what they might have learned perhaps in training actually into practice.
No, I completely agree with that, Justin. I think the the challenge often of delegation is that leaders can be controlling, so they don't like to give up the authority and responsibility in particular areas. And then the other element is that they just don't know how to do that. So it's very common to find senior leaders really caught up in the weeds, doing things that no senior leader should be doing, but it's been their bread and butter maybe for 20 or 30 years, and they've never learned to actually step out of that day-to-day technical role and to spend more time in the strategic role, in that coaching of their staff and building them up. And effective delegation is really that gateway between a leader who's caught up in the weeds and a leader who's able to be caught up in more strategic activity.
I think that leads very nicely into those business priorities, because I think some of those challenges you've touched on that leaders face that leads to those outcomes actually comes back to, well, how is effectiveness actually measured? Is it on business outputs? Is it on reporting? Is it on numbers and the like? And at times in business, everyone loves the idea of efficiency, but sometimes it's sitting down and saying, well, what does that mean? And how do we actually take the time to measure that? Because again, a critical part of that at times, efficiency needs investment. So to get better at things, to upskill leaders, takes time. It might be needing to pull them off customer service. It might be pulling them out of getting things out the door in the warehouse and the like. That can be a challenge, particularly from a short-term perspective, if the focus is how are we traveling for this month or this quarter. The other critical part of that operational efficiency at times is actually feedback directly from employees. So what is it they're finding gets in the way? Are they being asked to do things that don't make sense? Or are there things that they feel perhaps slow them down, or they could do things a bit better? A critical part of that comes back to, of course, is involving employees in the work they do, all of which sounds very clear and very obvious. But again, it's making the time and ensuring that you ask the right questions. And again, to go into those new markets, it's saying, well, what is it that your business is good at? What can we do well? And where is there a complementary opportunity, perhaps, that we can take those skills and apply it? Just the last one, Andrew, it's got innovation fail forward. I'm not sure any business sets out to fail, but did you perhaps want to expand on what that means to fail forward before you talk about engagement?
Sure. Organizations uniformly want to continuously improve and they want to innovate. And yet sometimes when an innovation, an attempt to do something new fails, what we do is we retreat. And we often can inadvertently or maybe even intentionally punish the attempt that failed, which then means that you quash innovation within your organization. People stop thinking about continuous improvement because they're worried about the consequences if they get it wrong. So this idea of failing forward really is the idea of learning from your mistakes. It's conveying to your staff that there are times when we attempt something new, it doesn't work perfectly, and what we need to do rather than beating ourselves up after that failure is to say what lessons can we learn and how do we try again. And so it really says that innovation and a failure at innovation can then be the step towards a new attempt and maybe a new success. I won't say a lot about engagement, but I mentioned a moment ago that phrase, leaders in the weeds, caught up in the technical day-to-day work. And as you look down that list, and I won't go through them one by one, but these bullet points represent the work of leadership. And we mentioned earlier that leaders drive engagement. And so leaders have to spend time, lots of time in their week, building relationships, giving feedback. Delegation is about giving autonomy and really inspiring their people to want to be involved in the organizational work, to want to innovate, to want to continuously improve, and having some skin in the game along the way. And I think a lot of organizations become inefficient, going back to the first point, because they haven't engaged their staff. And what they've got is people turning up, doing their 9 to 5, minding their P's and Q's, but not truly excited or enthusiastic about the work that they're engaged in.
I think a big part of feedback, and it's talked about a lot, is a big part of feedback and engagement is feedback, actually employees being comfortable to give feedback to their managers.
Sure.
I know having managed teams, getting feedback from employees isn't always the most comfortable or enjoyable experience, particularly where it's not hasn't been as positive as I might like it to have been. But it's really important, going back to culture, that there is an environment where people can talk openly about the things that they like within the business, or perhaps things that they may not like or think can be improved, without worrying about, well, how am I going to be seen? The key to it is making sure that employees understand, well, this is how to give feedback in a constructive manner, and this is how it should be received. So supervisors and managers also understand, well, we do want to hear from people, because where they feel they have skin in the game, their engagement actually increases. And often it's your best and most passionate employees who do want to give feedback, because it may be that they either are really happy about something and want to share it, or perhaps find something frustrating. I found at times employees who've seen as perhaps not performing as well as they could be, at times it's on account of a level of frustration, and they feel there's not the opportunity to give that feedback, or the feedback they feel isn't listened to because no one comes back to them and says, this is either what's going to happen, or perhaps the reasons why we're not going to action, whatever the suggestions might be.
You know, Justin, I was talking to a group of employees recently, and it was really a cultural question of, are you able to have that upwards conversation with your boss and provide feedback, whether it's positive or negative? And the group actually laughed, and one of them talked about career inhibiting conversations. And what they were saying was, upwards conversations that are critical of the organization or of the leader themselves are career inhibiting. Don't do it. You know, and I thought, wow, what a missed opportunity to, you know, so you're right, feedback should flow upwards and downwards. And I think part of leadership is that humility to be able to say, you know, I'm your leader, but I don't always get it right. And I'm happy to get some feedback from time to time that's going to help me to grow. And that in itself is inspiring to our staff, when they can see that there's this genuine kind of authentic desire, not just at the employee level, but at the senior leadership level, to be learning and growing as well.
And there are, on that measuring effectiveness and engagement, there are engagement surveys. Many organisations can use them. I've run them for many businesses. But I found the most valuable part of that is actually when you sit down with employees and say, here is the result. What does it mean? Why did people rate things the way they did, irrespective of whether the result was what people expected or otherwise? So the reasons for doing all of this, to be honest, Andrew, I don't think are earth-shattering. I think most people on this call would already be aware of, yes, it can improve our business and value, it can reduce turnover, it can reduce costs, all of those sorts of things I think are pretty self-evident. So I guess the question to you, Andrew, is, well, why doesn't it all just happen? What gets in the way of this happening day to day?
Well, I agree with that, Justin. It's something that you know, you and I have scratched our heads about before, but I often think organizations know what they need to do and simply don't get around to doing it. And maybe even some of our participants in today's webinar will be thinking, yeah, you know, this stuff isn't rocket science. We know this is true. Why is it that we don't get onto it? Sometimes I think it's the tyranny of the urgent. You know, everyone's busy. We're running around like headless chickens. We're chasing our tails, and that may be that sometimes it's you know, referring to something I said earlier. It might be that our leaders are so caught up in the detail of the business that they're not doing the strategic work. And a lot of what we're talking about here today is strategic. It's getting your organization set up to thrive. So I think the tyranny of the urgent is a big challenge. I think sometimes there's a reluctance to spend resources, spend money on developing people, on developing leadership. And yet all the research tells us your leadership development, for example, is one of the best investments you can make in growing your business. And yet I think often there's a reluctance to go down that path.
Yeah, I find at times initially I'll start working with a client and they will have a pressing problem. Often it'll be a particularly troublesome employee, or it'll be a very big business or people related problem that I'll initially be asked, as you've said, you know, okay, something really bad's happened because it's been left for a period. I'll assist them in resolving it. And then when we sit down and talk about the broader business and how can we avoid this again, it comes down to that phrase I always liked about, well, do we actually have the right people in the right place at the right time? So that right people is, are our team the right people? And, it's always an interesting question. If you're starting your business today, how many of your existing team would you actually employ? And do the reasons why? If there are people you wouldn't, well, okay, well, why not? And what can we do about it? The right place is you might have really good people, they're just not in the right roles. And it could be someone perhaps is ready to take the next step in their career, but you feel the business need is, gee, they're really good where they are. We need to keep them where they are. And the right time is saying, how can we ensure the business development and growth amongst our people actually coincides with the way the business develops? And I found at times what can happen is the business can actually grow faster than it can actually grow its people. That's where things such as a talent map, as it's called, looks at that and says, well, what is the succession plan? Who's in our business? What contingencies do we have? And what skills we need into the future to make sure that our business can continue and actually retain the people that we actually want. So, Andrew, it talks about confidence to execute there. What are your thoughts around what is confidence to execute?
Look, I think this really comes back to some of that dialogue we were having before about delegation, and the question of competence is one that, where you need to develop people's competence, and with competence comes confidence. I think the more competent your people are, the more likely they are to be self-managed and require less of your kind of day-to-day kind of management of them. And that empowering, in here is a lot of trust. There's a journey, isn't there, from that new employee who's learning the ropes to that fully fledged employee who you trust implicitly to really get on with it, and who does a great job and who has a real sense of enthusiasm and ownership about their role. So I think some of these things, that we're looking at here, Justin, they're actually about tweaking. They're not really expensive things to do. They don't take months or years to do. They're about getting people's skill set and making some of those small adjustments, for example, through delegation, more effective delegation, that can really pay quick dividends.
It says one of the points is clear understanding of roles, responsibilities, and accountabilities. And I think John gave you and I very, very clear responsibility and accountability for sticking to time, Andrew. So just in summing up what we've been through, if we go back to that Venn diagram, as we've touched on, a critical part of that compliance and business continuity from structure perspective is really making sure that managers are supported. That's not only from an environment and a culture perspective, but that is day to day making the time to have those conversations. But from a systems perspective is making sure that policies and procedures, which I often work on with clients, are actually in plain English and very simple for managers to understand, very simple for employees to understand. They need not be 4 or 5 page document. Sometimes a couple of paragraphs can summarize a business approach to something straightforward like drugs and alcohol, or it may be only 1 page is needed to explain how annual leave is taken along service leave and the like. But what's critically important to me is that the organizational culture actually drives and determines what the structure looks like, rather than a need to comply actually determines how people conduct themselves within the business.
Yeah, I often think, Justin, that there's a disconnect between who we say we are in our policy documents, in our vision and mission and values, and who we really are in terms of the day-to-day experience that people have. And so one of the things I like about this Venn diagram is this idea that there needs to be a congruence between who we say we are from a compliance and policy standpoint, and what people experience in their day-to-day role. And if you don't get that congruence, then there's kind of this angst. The researchers call it a relational dissonance that builds within people, where they start to get this intuitive or gut feeling that this isn't a great place for me to be. And so I think leaders working hard to make sure that who we say we are and who we really are adds up really makes for a workplace where people feel that sense of comfort. We talk a lot about psychological safety these days, and I think psychosocial safety is a big part of it. Actually, is about that congruence of knowing that who we say we are and who we really are is one and the same. But Justin, I saw some questions coming into the chat, so maybe it's a good chance for us to open up some of those and respond.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I will just very quickly bear with me.
The first question there
Yes.
is actually about AI and its impact on business. It says, how do you think AI can be used to support leaders to address the issues we've covered today? I probably won't spend a lot of time on this question. I don't know about you, Justin, but I'm not an expert on AI. I think there's some amazing technological shifts and developments going on at the moment. I don't imagine there's ever going to be a time, though, where leaders can abdicate their role of relationship building, motivating, coaching their staff to a bot. So I actually think AI is going to be tremendously helpful in doing some of the improvements around processes, maybe helping us get through our email load a little more efficiently. But I don't think it's going to replace relationship and that human element of what leaders need to bring to their workplace.
I think you're absolutely right. I think it's almost a bit like an email is a good example. I can remember when email first came in, it was going to revolutionize everything and it was going to make things easier. I'm still yet to meet anyone who goes, I was so happy when I woke up and I had 150 new emails because it meant I was valued and all these people want my help. One of the biggest challenges with AI is how do you get AI to demonstrate sympathy and empathy when dealing with people? I think as with all such things, it's very new. If you haven't taken the time to play with ChatGPT, it's worth doing as an example. I'll be honest, I used ChatGPT to write my wife's birthday card last year. She read it, she looked at me and she said, "You didn't write this, I can tell." So yes, it's a useful tool. Yes, it can add a lot of value. It's also, interestingly, a great way to engage employees because there is a lot of talk about it. So if you do talk to employees about what are your thoughts, what have you done with AI, similar to social media, yes, there's a role for it, but if we become over dependent on any tool, that may not always lead to the desired outcomes. The next question is an interesting one. Business leaders and managers will often vary their leadership styles. What does consistent leadership mean and look like, and how has it developed? Andrew?
Yeah, look, I think style's a really interesting question because we're all different, and the goal of forming a leadership team isn't somehow to make everyone the same. And so we need to learn to navigate different styles, and it also begins with knowing my own style and how I like to work and how I interact with the people around me. And I think a big part of engagement actually is enabling people to work within their preferences, which is really what style's about. On the other hand, we do talk about organizational values and leadership behaviors that we want to see happening consistently. And I think it's really important that leaders are consistent in their role modeling of things like organizational values and leadership behaviors. And that creates a sense of comfort and a sense of understanding from the cohort below those leaders of organizational culture and what the leaders are trying to drive. So it's helpful to keep leadership behaviors, values separate to the conversation about style, and recognizing that yeah, you're always going to have in a group of people different style preferences, and what we need to learn to do is work well within those preferences and not also to use my style as an excuse for bad behavior, which is what happens sometimes as well. But to recognize that sometimes I have to mitigate my own style as a way of serving or looking after someone else.
Just to add to that, I think the dilemma many business leaders face is, on the one hand, people say we want consistency and we want fairness, yet I also want to be treated as an individual and I am special and should be accommodated accordingly. Yeah. To me, that consistency is, in a like set of circumstances, a similar outcome would be delivered. But at times it also comes back to that engagement and understanding how your team work. We've all come across individuals who work really well when given very clear, very direct instructions. We've also come across individuals who want to know the reasons why and want to discuss and debate it. If you know those members of your team, you can vary your style accordingly, yet you'll be consistent. But if you get those two mixed up and wrong, it can lead to two very disaffected and disengaged individuals.
And I mentioned a moment ago too, self-awareness about style. And I think I've done lots of style workshops over the years with leaders who have never really thought about style before and have never had language to kind of reflect on or describe their own style. It can be quite a lot of fun, but it can also be really illuminating when you look at your leadership team from that style perspective. I think it's also helpful to put on alongside that a behavioural framework that helps you to think about what are the leadership behaviours that we all need to be doing consistently. And there's some really great research validated models that really set out, what effective leadership behaviours look like. And it's helpful to then see how does that fit into my style. And I think that point you made before about trying to be consistent, but also allowing for individual traits is a really helpful nuance for leaders to think about.
I think there's the old adage. There are variations of them about no plan survives first contact with the enemy, so to speak. I think you're right. I think a lot of leaders can be very intentional, but it's when things go wrong or they're faced with a big problem or something unexpected, at that point you find out, well, this is actually what the leadership style is right. And the challenge becomes how in times of stress or disappointment do leaders conduct themselves and what can be done to ensure that that consistency is applied when things are going well versus when things perhaps aren't on track. To that end, there's a question about, and we talked a fair bit about delegation earlier as a gateway to business sustainability, but then saying, but isn't performance really the key metric? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, performance is a key metric. And I think part of good delegation is being really clear about what are the KPIs, what are the agreed standards that we're trying to work towards. But I think delegation is far more than just setting out targets and numbers and working towards them. A big part of effective delegation is making sure that the person you're delegating to is suitably equipped, that they're competent to do the task or to achieve the outcome that you've set out for them. I think a big part of effective delegation is about delegating outcomes, not tasks. And the difference is that when you delegate an outcome, you give someone agency around how they're going to achieve that outcome. And that's where things like innovation and continuous improvement emerge. Whereas when you delegate by task, it tends to be very prescriptive. It tends to feel patronizing, particularly to those staff who are very adept and very competent. And so good delegation is about empowering. It's about helping someone grow in their self-efficacy so that they can do more. And I think that the danger, if you see it purely as driving performance, is that you'll fall into that trap of delegating by task and often being very controlling in the shape of that delegation, which might suit some people, but for your really high performers, they'll tend to feel patronized and tend to feel that they're not being given the autonomy and the freedom that they need to go about achieving the outcomes that they've been given.
So to that end, and that goes nicely to that last question is, so how do you measure progress in areas such as behaviours and engagement?
Yeah, you mentioned earlier, Justin, doing organisational kind of climate surveys. They call them sometimes culture surveys from time to time. And I think the role of a good climate survey is to measure the engagement of your people and the enthusiasm they have. So certainly you want to be able to report back to your people metrics around revenue and profit and improvement across the business, but you also want to be able to measure people's progress in terms of their taking on additional authority and responsibility. We need to praise people for driving continuous improvement initiatives and innovating in ways that improve the business. And I think you can do this not only corporately, but you can do it individually through a really good performance review process and regular dialogue with staff that enforces or reinforces those behaviours that you want to see and nips in the bud those behaviours that you don't want to see. And that ultimately is about shaping culture, making sure that the behaviours which are normal in your workplace are the behaviours that you've promoted and that you're happy with and that are actually helping your people to thrive.
Well, I think a critical part of that, before we get towards the end, is also about being very clear and setting expectations. Where people understand what's expected of them, it's far easier for them to measure that, recognise and reward it when it's done well, and of course address it perhaps where it hasn't been as one had hoped. So that brings us to the end of the questions. Andrew, thank you so much for your support and participation today. Perhaps I hand back to yourself, John.
Yes, thank you, Justin, and thank you, Andrew, and thank you, everybody, for attending and for staying the course. I hope you found the information that was shared today was helpful to you. It certainly is consistent with the results of the business sentiment survey, which was really, in essence, all about organisations working on their people and working on their business so that they can sustain their business performance. If you have any interest in accessing this information, it is recorded and there is information available on our website or by request. So let me know and we can forward that information to you. But I think we've done a great job. We've ended right on time, 11:15. So good timekeeping, boys. Good luck to everybody today and hopefully we can catch up soon. Thank you for attending.